and welcome to another episode of CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered U.S. Mideast Talk Radio. I'm your host today, Communications Director Frederick Butler, and today we're going to be joined by Mr. Ron Kukal. He is a USS Liberty survivor from the attack on June 8th, 1967. He was aboard the USS Liberty when it was struck by Israeli warplanes and left 34 soldiers dead and many more to question the relationship between Israel and the United States. Ron, before we get started, I know today around Washington is kind of a solemn day. We're commemorating the year anniversary of the shooting at the Holocaust Museum where Officer Stephen T. Jones lost his life. Before we get started, we'd like to go ahead and take a moment of silence out to commemorate the event and memorial and remind everyone that violence is never the answer. So we're going to go ahead and take a moment of silence. Ron, you were aboard the USS Liberty. If you could explain the events that day, what were you doing as far as your service on the ship?
First of all, I want to thank you for commemorating the shooting there at the Holocaust Museum. I think that was quite appropriate. I have my own moment of silence for that myself. Thank you for doing that. I was a first-class communications technician aboard the Liberty on June 8th, 1967. I actually was down below when the attack started. I was 2 decks down below the main deck. We had just finished a drill just a few minutes before that to prepare for anything like that. It might eventually happen, a general quarters drill. I had just no sooner sat down to my desk when I heard what I thought was hail on a tin roof. I can't explain it any other way because, first of all, you're quite surprised to hear a noise like that. I knew it was not a familiar noise to me, so I ignored it. How you could ignore something that loud, but I refused to accept the fact that the attack had started. You look for any excuse to try to explain away a noise like that. Well, it happened, and when it happened, I'm sure that several of my shipmates were already dead after that first strafing run. When questions come up, I'm very hesitant to answer some of them because I wasn't topside when the attack started. As a matter of fact, I wasn't topside most of the morning except for at 11:30. I did come up for a breath of fresh air, and I did notice, I think, what they termed as a flying boxcar way high overhead above me, and I suppose it was one of the planes that was reconnoitering the Liberty. So if questions pop up about where was Ron, before the attack, Ron was down below doing my duties as a communications technician. I heard this noise, and I tried to explain it away as I told you. Then when it came again, of course, I began to realize that there's something here that was really remiss, and I still didn't know what it was. The first moments that I began to realize that something was going on was somehow we got word from the topside that we were being strafed. Of course, I had no idea by who. I think that lasted for, I always hate to put a time on anything because time is something you don't really recall very well. I didn't even recall how long the attack lasted. I could only guess at it. But I think the strafing went on for at least a half hour to 45 minutes. There was the sound on the deck of the 50 caliber machine gun bullets hitting the deck, and then it would be silent for a short while, maybe 5 minutes or so, while they were making another circle to again strafe the ship from the stern to the bow. And this happened over and over again. And I don't think I really realized what was happening to my shipmates above me until much later on in the attack. The realization came to me quite quickly when the captain come on the 1MC, which is a loudspeaker system for the ship, saying that we should prepare for a torpedo attack, starboard side. And unbelief was one of the things that just passed my mind. I said, no, this don't happen to me. It only happens in the movies. But it was definitely happening. I think it was very, very shortly after when the captain announced that there was a torpedo on the way, that it did hit about 30 foot from where I was and exploded. Took out a lot of men then, went right across what we termed the O-branch spaces and killed several men, 25, I believe, instantly. Well, I might say that I'm really happy to be here because being that close to an explosion like that, it leaves a lot to be desired as far as what you should need to do. What I did do is, as soon as the captain had announced that there was an imminent attack coming, I laid flat down on the deck. When the torpedo hit and tore that hole in the side of the starboard side of the ship on the forward part of the ship. I think it was about a 40 by 40 foot hole somewhere in that area. Men died in my spaces all around me, but they were standing up. They probably caught a lot of shrapnel. Actually, you could hear it flying through the air. What there was, Fred, was instant water, but before that water came, you heard the stuff flying through the air. And it was dark, of course. You didn't see it. You just heard it. You knew it was happening. Then instantly, the compartment filled with water. I was making my way to the hatch. I knew where it was, and luckily there was a battle lantern. Those battle lanterns were never very reliable, I never thought, but that one worked when it needed to. And it came on next to the hatch where I knew I had to get out. And as I headed in that direction and went through the hatch, there were a lot of guys trying to get out at the same time, all trying to get up the same ladder. Some of us got hurt even trying to get up the ladder. I remember vividly that Joe Lentini got hurt quite badly trying to get up that ladder. Guys were just scrambling, stepping all over each other, and it was... All I can say about that is I do thank God that there was a way out. Bill Turney was in the spaces up above, and I believe he'd opened up the scuttle hole in the hatch and allowed us to get out one at a time. The scuttle hole is not very big, but it is big enough to get a person through it. Most of us did get out. On my way to the main deck, I passed Lieutenant George Golden, who was working frantically to start the emergency generators. He ordered me back down in the spaces below to make sure they all got out. I can say right now that the United States Navy, the training that we received was nothing less than superb, because I didn't want to follow that order, but I knew I had to. I did. I went back down below, and I did check. I couldn't hear anybody hollering. I couldn't discern anybody that was alive down there. So I went back topside, and when I got topside, I didn't realize it, but they were still strafing the main deck. I was so glad to get out of that space below from the possibility of drowning that I just didn't realize that the strafing was still going on topside. And Phil Turney had to tell me this, because it says you guys were out there slapping each other on the back and shaking hands and hugging each other, and all you could do because you were glad to get out of there, and here these 50 caliber machine gun bullets were flying all around you. I don't remember, but it must have been. So there's been a lot of questions about how long the attack lasted. My nearest guess is an hour and a half to maybe an hour and 45 minutes. I know that it suddenly did become quiet. We sat around for quite a while waiting, hoping they wouldn't come back after the attack was over. After they didn't, why then we began to do what we could to take care of the men that were injured.
Now, Ron, I believe you were finishing up your story. If you'd like to pick up where you left off.
We were in the process of taking care of our injured, and there were so many people, there were so many heroes that day that I wouldn't even know where to begin. The mess decks where we all ate, every table, as near as I can remember, had an injured person on it. That included our executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Armstrong. He died right there. I talked to him. I tried to talk to him just before he died. I think several men probably died on those tables down there. We had to call out for help, and, of course, they knew we were in a lot of trouble. We spent a lot of the rest of that day doing what we could for each other. Some really crazy things seemed to have happened. Things like, I had a man come up to me whose head was bandaged, and I thought done quite well, almost professionally. And he thanked me for bandages in his head, and I said, I don't remember doing that. And he said, well, you did. So, you know, things happen that you really, really don't have a handle on. And then to this day, I don't have a handle on it all. But we did spend that night taking care of each other, helping Dr. Kiefer take care of the injured. There was people, and I can't recall any names right now, that were actually assisting Dr. Kiefer. He was actually injured himself. If I remember correctly, he had a life vest on, and he wasn't wearing it for anything other reason than he was already injured, and I think it was just to hold his insides in, because I think he was injured pretty bad. And he performed these operations trying to save these men. All I can say is, what a man. As that night passed on, nobody really slept that much, but the only thing I can recall now is we waited and waited a long time for help. It just seemed like it was forever before the USS Davis showed up, and I think that was well over a day later. I can't tell you how elated I was to see that ship come over the horizon. The help that they gave us to keep the ship afloat, perform damage control, and by the way, the damage controlman did a heck of a job. As a matter of fact, every crew member that I served with had a part in keeping me alive. I know they did. So I'm proud of every last one of them. What I'd like to get to is we did get ourselves in shape where we could take the ship to Malta. And that was, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 miles to get there. We were told and ordered to sleep topside because most every officer aboard the ship felt that this ship could go down at any moment. It was a long trip. I think we were in Malta about 3 days later. The worst part of the attack for me was then when we began to recover the bodies, because I was the enlisted man in charge of the body recovery. Lieutenant Lee was the man in charge, the officer in charge, who wasn't aboard during the attack, but came aboard to assist in this. I was below him as the senior enlisted man in charge of the body recovery. The only thing I can tell you about the body recovery, and I'd like to make it short and sweet, I don't like to visit that area. The bodies were brought up to me from down below. Pretty much my duty to take a torso and an arm or leg, whatever was left of it, and try to make a body out of it, to try to identify it. The aftermath still is a part of my life. Whether I like it or not, it's going to be there till the day I leave this earth. It's going to be there.
I'm sure you're dealing with it in your own way. We're going to go ahead and shoot to a couple of callers. We're going to go to Byron first in Canada, then we're going to go to James in Jackson Heights. Byron, do you have a question?
You said when that ship finally showed up, you were so elated, earlier when the attack was actually taking place. How did you feel when you found out that the government then recalled those planes that could have helped you and maybe saved some lives? Secondly, I've heard Phil Turney, he said the ship was virtually unarmed, but you did have 450 caliber machine guns. Is that correct on the boat?
I really was having trouble hearing that question. How did I feel when I found out that the government had turned the planes back that we needed for help? Is that what he said?
Yeah, that's my question. I think it was Phil Turney said that the ship was virtually unarmed. You only had 450 caliber machine guns on the ship. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'll answer the second part first. 50 caliber machine guns. We had some small arms, M1s, 45s. As far as I know, that's all we had. As far as the first part goes, I've had a lot of years to ponder that particular question. I suppose anger was an unbelief that my own government would do this to me was the first thoughts that I have. But Byron, after 40-some years of battling with this, taking it out and looking at it and turning it over upside down, thinking about it, there's only one conclusion. When our government crosses that moral line, I like to call it an invisible line, when they would turn their back on their own people, I don't think I'm going to have to do much, Byron. I don't even have to be angry anymore, because I'm a strong believer that you can't cross those lines without some terrible, terrible repercussions. And are we not looking at them today? That would be my question to you.
Can I just finish up with one more question?
Go ahead, Byron.
Sure.
I've heard Phil, and now you've said that the aftermath of what took place, that you guys are still dealing with it. I know I've heard Phil say that a lot of the sailors, they turned to alcoholism. A lot of people ended up getting a divorce over this. When we look at what is going on in Gaza, even Iraq, Pakistan, I think the American sailors, they had, when they got home, some pretty good health care, doctors, psychiatrists, or whatever to help you deal with maybe some of the pain and suffering and anguish that you were going through. How do you think these people over in Iraq, Gaza, even Afghanistan, your incident happened for 2 hours. These wars that's in Iraq, Gaza's been going on for, 50, 60 years. The occupation, we look at Iraq, that's, 8 years. Afghanistan it just the other day became the longest war that the United States is involved in. We know in the Iraqi case that a lot of the professionals, they were rounded up by the Israelis and Americans. They were killed. How do you think those people, the civilians, are going to be able to deal with the aftermath, the ongoing conflict created by I'm going to say the Israelis and the Americans and the British? What is their lives going to be like? Thank you. And this story is so important. It needs to be kept being told over and over. Maybe the American people is going to wake up someday and take care of yourself. Thank you.
Well, Ron, you got about 20 seconds to answer this question. Go ahead.
First of all, he said he felt that we got excellent medical care. That's true. I really never had a problem with what the VA has done for me. But I do want to make one point quickly.
Hold on. Let's go ahead and get that after break. We'll go ahead and take that one after break. Hi, and welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered U.S. Mideast Talk Radio. I'm your host here, Communications Director for CNI, Frederick Butler, and I'm joined today by Mr. Ron Kukal, one of the survivors of the USS Liberty attack on June 8th, 1967. Mr. Kukal, go ahead and finish up the second point you wanted to make in response to Byron's question.
Yes. I don't think a lot of people know this, and the only reason I know it is because I worked for the Veterans Administration for 23 years. In my own personal experience is that I got what I consider the greatest medical care I could get. But I would like to make a very valid point here that can be proven. Most of the guys that were down below that had to do the body recovery, I'm sure that every one of them has a form or some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. I just want to let the audience know that at that time, when this happened to the USS Liberty, the VA did not have post-traumatic stress disorder even on their records as any kind of a procedure or any kind of a problem at all. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not recognized until later on. The proper care and the proper treatment of some of these guys, and I guess that included myself, probably was very minimal to say the least, because they just didn't know what it was. They didn't have a name for it. It wasn't diagnosed as such then. We battled this pretty much on our own for a lot of years. If I do nothing else in this interview, make that point very clear.
Let's go to James in Jackson Heights. James, do you have a question for Mr. Kukal?
Yes, I do. Sir, thank you very much for honoring us and being on the show today. I'd like you to describe for us a little bit the debriefings you had by the intelligence agencies that were trying to find out what happened. And specifically, in these briefings, did you see anything in their approach that suggested that there was certain information they did not want you to give? Did you see evidence of a cover-up in the way you were debriefed on what happened?
Yes, there's definite indications of that. Just let me tell you that there are people much more qualified than I am who are really involved with this particular procedure that happened to us. I was not one of the men that was questioned because I was too busy recovering bodies. When I came home after the attack, I was discharged in August of that same year with some pretty severe medical problems, especially back injury. I had no idea what had happened to me. I knew the ship had been attacked. I knew by who, but until James Ennis's book, Assault on the Liberty, came out, I really did not have a clue as to what went on around me. My information came from Assault on the Liberty, and then I have studied it and asked questions of a lot of people. I can't tell you how many who were questioned about this and who can tell you that there was definitely reason to tell us, and we were told. Now, I wasn't told this specifically, but there would have been some dire circumstances if we spoke about this at all. I believe $10,000 fine and 10 years in jail or something to that effect. So that's one of the things that... Am I allowed to speak about the books that have been written about this?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there's been a lot of books written about it, and of course Assault on the Liberty was the very first one by James Ennis Jr., which informed me a lot about what actually went on around me. Being down below, I didn't see it all. I just heard about it. And then there's been several other books written, Attack on the Liberty by James Scott, Operation Cyanide by Peter Heunen, and the latest book out there right now is by Phil Turney called What I Saw That Day. And all these books can be found on Amazon.com, and they really do clearly explain what happened to some of these fellows who were questioned about the attack. They told the truth about the attack. And from what I can understand from these boys, they were told they better not talk about it ever again. So I guess that's probably a fairly good answer to your question.
I advise all of our callers and listeners to check those books out. Now, let's go to David in Vancouver.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Ron, I appreciate what you're doing keeping this issue alive. I was a United States Marine in Vietnam when the Liberty was attacked. I remember reading about it in a brief article in Stars and Stripes magazine, and I never heard another word about it for decades. This was definitely a cover-up. What, in your mind, is the reason that our government is virtually alone in the rest of the world in the support of Israel at the United States Security Council level? Every time there is a UN resolution that goes from the General Assembly, it gets killed at the UN Security Council level by U.S. veto. There have been, I believe, over 100 of such resolutions, and they've all died before they get a hearing at the Security Council, including the Liberty, probably. I'd like people to know that a lot of the problem is in our Congress. We need to unelect these representatives that take money and free trips to Israel with their families on vacation as soon as they're elected to our Congress, and repeated trips to Israel, all funded by the Jewish, and I'm not anti-Semite. That's a false canard that's put out there. Anyone who dares challenge Israel is regarded as an anti-Semite by the propagandists. There's a good article on this, The Best Congress AIPAC Can Buy. Google that. It's by Philip Giraldi. It's a fairly recent article. It's been out there. The Best Congress AIPAC Can Buy. I suggest that everybody read that article and take it to heart. I thank you for all you've done, Ron, to keep this issue alive. More people need to know about this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Let's go ahead and flash to Gerhard in Melbourne.
Ron, I'd like to thank you for the time and the stress that you've had to put up with over this incident. I'm retired Navy, and I've been following this incident since 1967. The one thing that's never been really satisfactorily explained, I think everybody who's read about it knows the attack was deliberate, but I've been unable to really satisfactorily determine why. Why do you think that you were attacked?
I prefer to believe that they thought we had intercepted communications proving that they were going to go ahead and take the Golan Heights and the Gaza Strip, even though LBJ had told them to stop, as I understand it. That's about as far as I can go with that. But while I got you on the phone here, can I just read you a short letter I've had since June 28th of 1988? It's a very short one from Paul Findlay to James Ennis, Jr.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dear Jim, I talked by phone this morning with Ambassador George W. Ball, and he authorized the following statement regarding Israel's assault on the USS Liberty. Mr. Ball said, I have read the documents and other materials about Israel's assault on the USS Liberty, and there's no way it could have been an accident. The attack was absolutely deliberate, and the cover-up of the facts by our government is a shameful affair. Now, I like to quote those kind of things because Ron Kukal is a calm and ordinary run-of-the-mill guy. This comes from an ambassador. And if I remember correctly, the last time I looked on the websites about the Liberty, that there's about 15 people who were very prominent back in during that era who have said publicly that the attack was no accident. I don't have the names of the men in front of me right now, but Dean Rusk, Secretary of State, said in his book, As I Saw It, that he never believed the Israeli excuse, and he said, I don't believe it to this day.
Welcome back to CNI Jerusalem Calling, your source for unfiltered U.S. Mideast Talk Radio. Today we're joined by USS Liberty survivor Ron Kukal. This show is a project of the CNI Foundation, which works for fair U.S. policies in the Middle East and fair discussion of those policies here in America. And we would also like to invite you all to check out our blog, Fair Policy, Fair Discussion. It's easy to find. All you have to do is Google Fair Policy, Fair Discussion. Now, Mr. Kukal, going back to the government's reaction to the attack, how did that make you feel?
My response has been, over the years, I have stated several times that it's unbelievable to me. It's still hard for me to swallow that they would turn their back on their own people. And for what reason? The only thing that I can ever discern from this after all these years, I'll just let you know right now, I'm the former chaplain for the U.S. Liberty Veterans Association, and I know that from a biblical standpoint, I think most people think that they're doing the right thing by supporting these people in every aspect, no matter what they do. I don't think anything could be more wrong than that. No one should be allowed to do what's been done, especially just lately. No one will ever make me believe that, and I'm a Christian person. Just recently, I participated in a movie that was made in North Carolina. I didn't think that there was anything about this that could ever bother me too much because I've been through it so many times. I will tell you this, that on the Liberty Hour one time, being interviewed by Phil Turney or Mark Glenn, I can't remember which, I actually had a blood pressure machine tied onto my arm to watch what was happening, and actually had to get off the radio show when we got into the certain parts of this, like the body recovery, because I saw my blood pressure jump up to about 180-some over. I don't know what the bottom number was, but I got off the show immediately. Does the aftermath affect you? Yeah, it does, and it's still there. I'd like to bring up one quick thing, too. Just recently, there's been an editorial about Charles K. Ebinger, the director of the Energy Security Initiative for the Brookings Institution.
Mm-hmm.
He put out an excellent article that's out on the Internet. It's called The Attack on the USS Liberty, Lessons for U.S. National Security. And may I just quote one of the statements within that security initiative. Indeed, the attack on the Liberty is the only maritime incident in U.S. history where our military forces were killed that was never investigated by Congress. Now, you will hear there's been about 10 investigations. That is simply not true. The Naval Board of Inquiry said that the attack was an accident. The consul for the Board of Inquiry was Captain Ward Boston. Before he left this earth, he left a statement saying that the Naval Board of Inquiry was a whitewash. He was forced into making the decision, the outcome to be an accident. That's a public statement that you can find on the Liberty website. By the way, if you want to find anything about the USS Liberty, you can Google it. You don't have to put much in there, USS Liberty, and all this stuff will come up.
Let's go ahead and go to Gloria in Ohio.
I've been spreading the word about the USS Liberty for 2 years, ever since I took the trip with CNI. My question is, getting the message out to people who are not already converted, is there a list of the people who died on the USS Liberty? Are there pictures of the men who died that could be distributed so we really attach the faces to this terrible incident? Also, do you think the tide is turning since the attack on the flotilla? Do you feel any change? Let us know how we can continue to spread the word and what materials could be provided that would take the attention of people more. Thank you.
There is a lot of things being done, and I do think the tide is changing. And I've had the chance to observe it for a lot of years. There was a time that you didn't hardly even speak about this. Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. As far as finding out who died and any more particulars so you could help get the word out, yes, you can go on the USS Liberty websites. But one person that comes to mind, and I really think she was on this program at one time, I'm not so sure she wasn't a moderator, was Allison Weir. Nobody has put the information out like Allison that I know of. I've gotten a lot of her stuff. It actually takes into account the attack. It talks about everything that happened that day, and I believe the crew members' names are on some of her information. She has got a wealth of stuff out there, if Americans knew. Yes. And you can find that on the website just about anywhere. If you really want to get a real picture, if you want to live it, if you want to be right there, get the latest book by Phil Turney, What I Saw That Day. It's on Amazon.com. You can sit there riveted to your chair and actually be right there because he describes it so well. Phil is a Bronze Star winner. He probably could be attributed to saving most of us guys that were down below by opening up the hatch so we could get out.
Well, we have a little bit over a minute left, and before we close, I want to get your take on the Gaza flotilla. You alluded to earlier the fact that you believe that U.S. policy towards the region could be changing. Could you go into depth about that and the flotilla mission?
Well, I think it's changing simply because you can actually talk about it now. And there was a time, I can remember, that you couldn't talk about it. And I'd like to interject one quick thing here. I've seen some USS Liberty survivors that are fearless. I guess I'm going to have to put Joe Metters on that fearless list because he was on the Liberty when it was attacked. Then he got on the flotilla, and he was captured. I believe he was detained for a while and sent back home. I'm not exactly sure if I was invited to go out there if I would have went out. Kudos to Joe Metters. What a job.
We also had Ambassador Ed Peck along for that flotilla mission. He was actually on our show last week. You can check out that show in our archives. Ron, we have about 20 seconds left. Do you want to make any final statements before we head out of the show this evening?
I was going to tell you that one quick thing, that if there's anything that will bring me to my knees quicker than anything else, is the pain that I feel about the apathy of the American people who know that this is out here and know the truth about it and will do nothing. Out here and know the truth about it and will do nothing. Out here and know the